Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, it's a spooky weekend for adults to dress up and do what all adults like to do. Get in costume, act like kids, trick or treat with their favorite plant. The Summit Lounge in Worcester, Mass, always a high time. And with days to go before the 2024 vote, the question remains, which candidate will deliver the reform the industry wants and needs? VP Kamala Harris brings out the heavyweights for the final push, a virtual rally with Willie Nelson, Bruce Springsteen, and former President Barack Obama.
The next President of the United States of America, Vice President Kamala Harris.
So will that give her the edge over former President Donald Trump? What impact will the result have on federal reform anyway? Plus, the battle over Delta 8 hemp and Texas medical cannabis heads into the next legislative session in the Lone Star State. And a major recall of moldy products in Maine for a Massachusetts-based distributor, while the Bay State passes $6 billion in sales revenue. And Snoop Dogg admits to consuming 81 blunts a day while employing a staffer to monitor the intake of his entourage. And which gender do you think buys more weed? Now, it's a 50-50 shot, but buying weed from women is more than a brand. It's now the dominant gender when it comes to the product. And bidding begins in Colorado for vanity plates celebrating that state's pro-cannabis laws. All that and state reports from coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto. Next.
We are Pro-Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, Pro-Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of cannabis news from the industry. I'm Alaina Pinto, and if you want to have the show available for you anytime on your mobile device, just download the app PCM TV from the App Store or Google Play, and you can have this content on demand. The QR code on the screen will take you right there. Our top story continues to be focused on the presidential election that takes place in just over a week on November 5th, but early voting has begun and the two candidates continue to work the campaign trail in the battleground states of Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. All told, there are 93 electoral votes up for grabs in those states where polls indicate a dead heat. One state that used to be a battleground state, Georgia, is where VP Kamala Harris hosted a virtual live-streamed rally with some heavy hitters from entertainment like Bruce Springsteen and former President Barack Obama.
And the good news is, we've got a candidate to vote for in this election who demonstrates that kind of character, who knows what real strength looks like, who will set a good example and do the right thing and leave this country better than she found it. That is what this election is about. And that is why it is my honor to introduce my friend, the next President of the United States of America, Vice President Kamala Harris.
So you all may know, it was 17 years ago. It was over 17 years ago when I took a trip to Springfield, Illinois. It was a cold February day. And I went there to support this brilliant young senator who was running for president of the United States. And millions of Americans were energized and inspired, not only by Barack Obama's message, but by how he leads, seeking to unite rather than separate us. And that is why in 2007, I went New Year's Eve to Iowa to knock on doors in the snow. And all these years later, Barack Obama I say to you, your friendship and your faith in me and in our campaign means the world. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
In Texas, former President Donald Trump made an appearance at a rally in Austin, but it was in San Antonio on Thursday night when an election official was assaulted upon leaving the facility where early votes were being counted. She was shaken up, but returned home safely. To call Texas a battleground state is an understatement, considering the mixed legal approach towards cannabis. Hemp-derived products from Delta 8 dominate the market, while a physician-based medical program exists for about a dozen diagnoses. And now the medical cannabis industry and the Delta 8 hemp industry will be battling at the Texas State House as Dallas and other Texas cities vote to decriminalize cannabis despite the wishes of their governor and attorney general. Here's our Texas correspondent, Lisa Williams, with more.
I'm Lisa Williams, founder of the Toke Agency, bringing you the Texas Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. All right, things are heating up fast in the Lone Star State, and Texas, while it remains one of the few states with broad marijuana legalization, it's clear the cannabis conversation is booming, especially around hemp and its more intoxicating relatives, Delta 8 and Delta 9 THC. Right now, Texas is facing a bit of a dilemma. The state's medical marijuana program, known as the Compassionate Use Program, has been a lifeline for around 12,000 patients, offering low THC cannabis to treat conditions like epilepsy, PTSD, and cancer. But with only 3 dispensaries to cover this entire massive state, many are finding it hard to get access to the medicine that they need. Meanwhile, the hemp industry is flourishing in Texas, offering products like Delta 8 and Delta 9 THC in gummies, oils, and edibles, for which many deliver a similar experience to marijuana. Here's where it gets a little tricky. Because these hemp products fall into this legal gray area, they're largely unregulated. That raises concern about safety, with some reports of the products containing harmful contaminants like pesticides and heavy metals. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has called for stricter regulations, and lawmakers eyeing everything from age limits to mandatory testing. But banning these products outright, that's a big no for most Texans. Many, including veterans, prefer these hemp products because they're cheaper and easier to get than the highly regulated medical cannabis. It's this balancing act between making sure the products are safe and keeping them accessible for those who depend on them. So, as we look towards the next legislative session in 2025, Texas lawmakers will have to decide: tighten the reins on the hemp industry, expand the medical marijuana access, or just keep trying to juggle both. What about just making cannabis legal in the state of Texas? Stay tuned, folks. This is a wild ride, and we're just getting started. I'm Lisa Williams, founder of the Toke Agency, bringing you the Texas Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There was a major fine imposed on a small illegal cannabis operation in upstate New York this past week. The dispensary, called Jadega, had been warned multiple times over the past few years to stop operations. A cease and desist notice was sent out last summer and was ignored by their owner-operator, George West. Now, he is facing a fine of $9.5 million for ignoring many attempts for him to close his doors. In June of 2023, a raid confiscated over 200 pounds of cannabis and ordered him to shut his doors. He did not, so now he's facing one of the largest fines issued in any state against a single unlicensed store. It was in June of this year that West was ordered to shut down his store again, and now he's got a huge fine to pay that state that has now banned him from operating anywhere in New York. But it's not all bad news in the New York State, where the social equity world will be getting some sorely needed operational capital. Here's Pam Chmiel with more from the Big Apple.
This is Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and I'm Pam Chmiel reporting from New York. The New York City Cannabis Loan Fund was recently launched to help licensed social equity businesses in New York City get access to capital. A previous fund, supported by the Chicago Atlantic Investment Group, was accused of corruption, where state senators ultimately called for an investigation and demanded the state cease making any loan deals with Chicago Atlantic. Everyone's hoping better success with the new loan. And New York City's Cannabis Control Board recently approved a big merger with RIV Capital and Consortium, a vertically integrated operation in Florida with the Fluent dispensaries. And according to a Benzinga article, the merger is expected to close by the end of 2024, positioning the company to have 25% of the U.S. market share, with 8 cultivation and processing facilities and 42 dispensaries spread out across 4 states, including New York. And CBS News is reporting that New York City Sheriff Anthony Miranda is facing more questions over his department's seizure of cash during raids on illegal cannabis storefronts. So far, over 27,000 pounds of cannabis has been seized. And the New York City Council is also demanding records from the sheriff's office because they want to know exactly how much money his office took from these smoke shops. More on this as it unfolds. In the meantime, it's Pam Chmiel reporting from New York for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of New Mexico is the center of a lawsuit by 8 legal cannabis operators against the Biden administration and the U.S. Customs and Border Control operating in that state. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Andrew Behringer, has that story, including some details of the inhumane treatment of some of the drivers of the vehicles that were delivering legal cannabis to legal operators.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. With Election Day approaching, cannabis reform continues to make headlines across the United States. Recent polls show that 88% of Americans now favor legal cannabis for either medical or adult use, with support crossing from both party lines. Both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris support easing restrictions, reflecting a broader shift in political attitudes than recent past. While Democrats champion personal freedom and regulated access, Republican opposition has softened significantly, with only 17% supporting complete prohibition. Now, this November, 4 states, Florida, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota, will be able to vote on cannabis legalization in their respective state. Good luck, and please don't forget to vote. In different news, though, in New Mexico, 8 licensed New Mexico cannabis companies are filing a federal lawsuit, which happened on October 22nd against the United States Customs and Border Patrol Protection Agency and the Department of Homeland Security. Now, this lawsuit alleges unconstitutional seizures of legal cannabis products and unlawful detention of industry workers, with damages exceeding over $1 million. Now, according to this filing, Customs Border Patrol adopted a new policy in 2024 specifically targeting New Mexico's legal cannabis operations, despite similar business operating legally in other border states like Arizona and California. The companies report employees being detained and fingerprinted before release without charges, along with the seizure of personal vehicles. Now, while Congress limits federal interference with medical cannabis programs, these restrictions do not extend to the adult use operations of the cannabis industry currently. The lawsuit seeks documentation of seized property, compensation for losses, and establishment of a formal process for challenging future seizures. The plaintiffs argue that this enforcement actions not only disrupt business operations, but also contradict the federal policy of non-interference with state legal cannabis programs. Now, potentially undermining New Mexico's regulatory framework and inadvertently benefiting the illicit market. Well, that's the Washington Report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Coast to Coast, Cannabis Coast to Coast News. See you next week.
As long as cannabis remains a Schedule I substance, according to the CSA, the conflict between federal and state law will always cause challenges to operators. That's happening in many states, and as our Colorado correspondent Xavier Jaillet explains, until the feds figure out what schedule, if any, to put cannabis on, the conflict between the feds and states will continue.
Hi everyone, my name is Xavier Jaillet. I am the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also a non-attorney professional at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And I'm this week's Colorado correspondent for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I've got two stories to report on today. One of them is a little bit more fun, and the other one's a little bit more serious. I do like ending on a bit of a funner note, so we'll start with the more serious story. And that is that the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, it's the federal agency responsible for overseeing and administering provisions of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that of course prevents discrimination against employees for various disabilities. Now, cannabis operators, I think, typically like to believe that they operate outside of the purview of federal law and agencies because they distribute and are engaged in a business that is federally illegal. Now, as I reported on when it came to OSHA in another employee-related case a few weeks back, here we have a situation where a federal agency is indeed issuing a fine and a determination against a dispensary for, again, improperly firing an employee. Now, what this means and the impact of this is that it's a stark reminder that cannabis operators here in Colorado are still subject to federal oversight and regulation from agencies, regardless of how they believe the federal governments treat the products, cannabis, that they're primarily engaged in selling. And a reminder, again, underscoring the ever important component, let's say, of cannabis, that compliance is king. And typically people think of regulatory compliance, they think of labels, packaging, product potency. But at the end of the day, these businesses do employ employees, and in the eye of federal agencies, as we've seen with this case, those employees are deserving of the same protections that employees in, let's say, non-federally illegal businesses get. Now, the second story, like I said, is a bit of a funner one, being that the state of Colorado has renewed its program issuing license plates to residents that are cannabis themed. Now, this is a special program. There's a limited number of license plates, but every year residents are able to bid on the right to use these license plates. The license plates contain terms that are related to cannabis, like reefer or high life or 420, fun phrases indicating, let's say, passion or participation in the cannabis industry. And these proceeds are then used for various social justice efforts around the state. Now, this program has been in place since 2021, and while in the grand scheme of government spending, it may not seem like much, the program has raised over $100,000, and Colorado intends to continue offering the cannabis-themed vanity plates to residents for years to come. That's it from Colorado this week. Again, my name is Xavier Jaillet, and I'm looking forward to bringing you some news at next week's update.
That will do it for the A Block this week, but we have a lot more to get to, including the latest adventures of Snoop Dogg, who shares what his daily consumption of the plant medicine is like. Plus, the news from California on one coast to Massachusetts on this coast. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection. And this is Bob. And this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Welcome back to the B Block, or second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast newscast. I'm Alaina Pinto. Don't forget to download our free app, PCMTV, on the App Store or Google Play, and that way you can watch our news every week with just one click, starting on Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern. Now we turn to California, where there is always something going on in the cannabis world. We may as well start with the #1 cannabis personality in the world, and that would be Snoop Dogg. If he's not at the Olympics, he's on the Today Show doing weather or appearing as a coach and judge on The Voice. Well, did you know he was a resident of Long Beach, California? Probably didn't surprise you, right? Well, now that community might be one of the first in the Golden State to issue a single-day open consumption permit, but it would be for a special occasion. You see, Snoop Dogg's 53rd birthday was last weekend on October 20th, and the Long Beach City Council is starting a 60-day study on the social and economic impact if they were to have an open consumption birthday party for Snoop next year.
T wants to know, who was the lightest weight smoker you've ever lit up with?
Damn, who was lightweight? There's so many of them. They featherweights. There's too many to name, baby. Why don't you come join me so I can add you to the list?
Me, I have joined you, and I did okay. But Snoop has a guy with him when he gets you high who kind of says, hey, stop.
That's enough.
Yeah.
And admitted two things. One, he does have a full-time staffer whose job it is to monitor consumption of anyone who hangs with Snoop and might have a little too much product. The other thing Snoop admitted was that he probably smokes 81 blunts a day. Not sure what is the daily intake for our Virginia correspondent, Joe Parsons, but it's never enough to stop him from coming up with interesting stories week in and week out. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection. And this is Bob. And this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Pro Cannabis Media and myself would like to wish everyone a happy and safe Halloween week. First out the Commonwealth, the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority recently announced that its ad campaign for safe driving has won 4 national awards for its public service announcements. It was an honor considering our PSA ads were in competitions with other huge giants like Amazon, Netflix, and Toyota. They took home 2 golds by the Bulldog PR Awards and the NYX Awards, and 2 silver awards from the New York Digital Awards and the Muse Awards. You can check out these award-winning ads on the VCCA's YouTube page. Now, in the spirit of Halloween, do you know who the scariest person who hates cannabis is? Whoa, that was scary, and he definitely hates cannabis. But that's not the person I'm talking about. I'm talking about this guy. That's right, Freddy Krueger hates cannabis probably more than anyone. Let me tell you why. Multiple studies have found that cannabis can affect your ability to enter REM sleep. REM sleep is when you begin to dream. Some studies point out that this is one of the plant medicine's major drawbacks, and even label it as a negative side effect. However, over 10 million adults, including myself, suffer from night terrors. True story. While fairly common for children, with roughly 30% of children having extreme night terrors at some point in their life, mine never stopped, well into my early 20s. I used to feel like Nancy from Elm Street.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
I was afraid to go to sleep. But after I became a regular cannabis user at the age of 21, I noticed that my nightmares almost completely disappeared. Now the only dreams I can remember are either funny or pleasant. That's if I even remember them at all. I usually just fall asleep and wake up feeling refreshed, like no time has even passed. It's been fantastic. Studies show that if you like to dream, it's best not to consume for up to 4 hours before bed. But if you're like millions of people, including myself, that are trying to keep this guy out of their heads, then cannabis is an all-natural remedy that can change your life. Happy Halloween, everyone. That's going to do it for the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons with Bob. Until next time, stay lifted.
No matter what state enacts cannabis reform, regulators and lawmakers want to make sure that those who have been most impacted by the failed war on drugs get a shot at applying for the cherished licenses. In New York State, they made a mess of the rollout and have seen thousands of illegal shops open, willing to pay the fines as a cost of operations. Then lawsuits were filed and regulators were let go. But now in Arizona, the courts are giving a break to those social equity applicants. Here's Karen Black with that story and more from Arizona.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In a significant legal victory, a Maricopa County Superior Court judge ruled in favor of local dispensary operator Juicy Joint 1 LLC, putting an end to the attempted takeover of its license. The case involved social equity license awardee Annabelle Vasquez, who abandoned her original company and struck a deal with Moaz Nani and Chip Boyden to own the majority stake in another entity to which Ms. Vasquez transferred her license. The court upheld arbitration findings that confirmed Vasquez breached her duties, leading to the restoration of the license to Juicy Joint. The ruling highlights ongoing challenges within Arizona's social equity program, as some investors and large companies have been accused of exploiting it. Tax revenue from Arizona's cannabis industry surpassed $20 million for the 34th consecutive month in September. The Department of Revenue reported over $22.4 million generated last month, a slight dip compared to the same time last year. The state has collected nearly $70 million this fiscal year to date and over $1 billion since adult use sales began in January 2021. The Giving Tree Dispensary is giving back. They've launched a new cannabis education service tailored to older adults. The initiative, called Cannabis 101 for Seniors, aims to help older Arizonans understand and navigate the world of medical marijuana. The program offers one-on-one consultations and covers topics such as the various cannabis products, consumption methods, and potential benefits for age-related and other health conditions. Can pre-rolls lead to a payday? They will for one lucky Arizona cannabis consumer. Mazor Collective announced it will give away $10,000 next February. Customers can enter to win by purchasing a new limited edition sneakers brand rolled and ready 5-pack and submitting the unique code found inside. The winner will be announced on Valentine's Day. A very sweet surprise indeed. That's all for the Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
What's with pizza all of a sudden becoming a target for rogue operators? In Wisconsin this week, someone used THC-infused oil in making pizzas from October 21st to the 24th. That got dozens of people ill or very high, depending on your perspective. They all ate pizza from Famous Yetis in Stoughton, Wisconsin. An oil container in that shared kitchen facility tested positive for THC. The owner of Famous Yetis is cooperating with the investigation. Meanwhile, in Germany, it's a little more serious when cocaine was served as a side dish on pizza number 40. Needless to say, this pizza became quite popular until law enforcement busted the owner of the Dusseldorf pizzeria and released him when he agreed to cooperate. Then, police took down a major distribution ring and arrested 3 more suspects. You might want to think twice the next time you order a slice to go with everything on it. Now let's check in with Tina Tasaka for her Nevada Cannabis Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. CLS Holdings USA, Cannabis Life Sciences, a diversified cannabis company that acts as an integrated cannabis producer and retailer through its Oasis Cannabis subsidiaries in Nevada, has partnered with AE Global's Talk Trash initiative to introduce certified plastic negative packaging at its Oasis Cannabis dispensary in Nevada. This initiative aims to prevent over 27,000 pounds of ocean-bound plastic in 2025, equivalent to more than 1 million plastic bottles. The dispensary's new exit bags, made from 20% post-consumer recycled material, removes twice the amount of plastic used in their production. CLS plans to expand sustainable packaging to its City Tree brand, positioning Oasis as a leader in eco-friendly cannabis retail, balancing sustainability with quality and innovation. Planet 13 Holdings, Inc., Nevada, just opened its 28th dispensary in Florida and 32nd nationwide on October 19th in Port Orange. Co-CEO Larry Scheffler highlighted the region's growing population and tourist appeal. Quote, Florida continues to be a cornerstone of the Planet 13 growth strategy, and we're pleased to expand patient access and strengthen our presence on the east coast of the Sunshine State with the opening of our 28th dispensary in the state, unquote, Planet 13 co-CEO Larry Scheffler said. Lastly, let's all have fun this Halloween, and one way that you can be safe includes the Nevada Zero Coalition, which is providing $1,500 in free Lyft ride credits in Las Vegas and Reno from October 26th to November 3rd to promote safe, sober rides this Halloween. With 44% of Nevada's fatal crashes linked to impaired driving, Zero Fatalities program Manager Anita Pepper urges residents to avoid driving under the influence, whether from alcohol, cannabis, or prescription drugs. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Vermont, a strange case of a grow farm that was the target of thieves who were helping themselves to someone else's legal cannabis plants. The alleged crime happened in Bennington, Vermont, and was caught on security cameras. The owners of the farm, Jesse Cook and Zachary Lake, alerted the local police department and were able to identify one of the trespassers. The owners and the police set up a sting operation for the return of the plants and arrested the thieves at that time. Now they face up to 11 years in jail for their crimes of grand larceny, criminal trespass, and unlawful mischief. In Maine, they have another problem. Tainted cannabis from a Nova Farms grow facility has been recalled for mold contamination. Over 20 dispensaries carried the products from the Nova Farms facility, and now Maine regulatory officials want all of those products off the shelves. Plus, any already existing products should be returned, allowing the consumers to get their money back. One more note from the state of Michigan. Falling prices, over 600 licensed dispensaries, and poor management doomed one of the state's biggest businesses, and Skymint fell into receivership last year. And this week, the auction of the remaining assets were sold. Amie Carter is in Michigan and has more.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Former Michigan House Speaker and the former chairman of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board, Rick Johnson, lost his latest attempt to leave federal prison years early when a federal judge denied his request. Just last month, federal agents seized Johnson's 40-acre hunting property in northern Michigan because Johnson failed to pay over $100,000 for a judgment stemming from the largest public corruption scandal in Michigan's capital in 30 years. The Michigan Weedsters recently joined efforts with We the People for Cannabis, Rally for Justice and Truth, Deschedule, Not Reschedule, which is being held on December 2nd. Assembly 7 a.m., rally starts at 8 a.m. It is across the street from the DEA Museum at the rescheduling hearing. 700 Army Navy Drive, Arlington, Virginia. Over 43,654 comments were submitted on the Federal Register for the DEA scheduling proposal, making it the most comments in history for any proposal. 70% of those comments are in favor of descheduling, not rescheduling. To find out more, go to deschedule-not-reschedule.info. Meds Cafe in Ann Arbor has been voted best dispensary for a beginner in Washtenaw County for 2024 Metro Times. Congratulations to the Ann Arbor team. Meds Cafe is also in the news this week for expanding. Not only can you find them in 7 different locations here in Michigan, you can now find them in Key West. The first cannabis bar in Key West, Florida has officially opened. Stop by 221 Duval Street where they have good herbs and great vibes, 21 and up. That will do it for this week. I'm Amie Carter with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, but we still have more state reports and the story about why women are now bigger consumers of cannabis than men. All that and more as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
In serene Springfield, Ohio, Ethan battles anxiety and persistent body pain. Seeking relief, he turns to Yellow Labs' Calm THC cream, offering tranquility via delivery technology. Massaging in the cream, Ethan feels waves of peace and serenity easing his anxiety and tension. Empowered by the remarkable relief, he sets out on a journey towards healing and renewal. Drawn to Yellow Labs' transformative offerings, the Calm THC cream becomes a beacon of comfort, soothing both his physical and emotional pain.
Yeah, it's a great question because cannabis is very exciting. It's almost like, mom and pop drugstores. You could start whatever you wanted. You could be pretty successful. And then there are the business people who see the revenue potential. And those are the ones that I think they are going to become the buyers going forward. And then smaller companies will be the sellers. And then there'll be another group of like, what the heck happened? And there'll probably be some craft survivors as well. But I think, the access to capital and business, this is becoming a mature business, just like craft beer or the car industry from, the 1910s to today. Yeah, I think Schedule 3 will have radical changes. I think we're going to see consolidation in the space independent of Schedule 3. Schedule 3 will influence the flavor of the consolidation, but it's going to happen no matter what.
Will that open up more capital?
It'll open up more capital, more access. One way or another, as the industry consolidates, they're going to have to get access to capital. The buyers will, and that's going to change the markets fundamentally.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the final section, or the C Block. I'm Alaina Pinto. A reminder to download our app, PCM TV, at the App Store or Google Play, so you can follow our news coverage every week on demand. Next up, the state of Massachusetts. It's celebrating another sales milestone. The first East Coast state to legalize adult use sales of cannabis now has surpassed the $6 billion mark, and yet many feel the market has reached its limit. No limits on the publicly traded stocks, which is where Doug Miller plays in his High on Wall Street segment, followed by Debi Facey in Canada. Here it is.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. SNDL has acquired all the issued and outstanding common shares in the capital of Nova that were not already owned by SNDL. The acquisition of Nova's remaining minority interest represents a significant milestone that will streamline SNDL's cannabis retail operations and generate material savings by eliminating public company expenses, said Zachary George, SNDL CEO. The Nova shares are expected to delist from the TSX and the OTC markets. So let's see how the SNDL stock chart looks. It is trading around $2.18, and it's running up, and it's setting up the run up even higher. So watch for dips and trade smart. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast, I'm Doug Miller.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. So what we have in our first story is the company ReadMe had a recall of their ripped zone in and out pre-rolls that were sold between the days of October 2nd to 11th out in Alberta, and this is due to the fact that they were not properly tested. This means that their labeling was incorrect, and this should be not only taken off the shelves, but for any consumers that do have this product, please do not smoke it. Next, what we have is Yukon asking for a revision when it comes to consumption lounges. They are noticing that even though that they have restricted the consumption of cannabis only to private establishments, so it's their house, there's a lot of public consumption happening outdoors. This is something that they have noticed, they are trying to address, and they are initially now stating that they would like to have consumption zones just to ensure that not only they are subduing any of the illicit market, but they are also giving their consumers a safe, great place to consume their cannabis. This is Debi Facey with your Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Peace.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Two big stories out of Oregon this week. The first is that cannabis regulators are proposing revoking licenses and issuing fines for 7 labs for potency inflation, and also not following sampling protocols. There are only 11 labs in the whole state, so this has the potential of creating backlogs for getting product tested. There is reported to be video footage of lab employees adding kief to flower samples, which would of course distort the potency result. It's important for consumers to have confidence that their products are free from harmful pesticides, heavy metals, and toxic molds, but potency is not a consumer safety issue. Next, this year's outdoor harvest is reported to be one of the best. The weather has cooperated, with the rains holding off until late fall. Last year, many crops were ruined because of the rain and extreme fires. This year, there were fewer wildfires and the weather was sunny and warm. Final harvested weights are not all in, but this is all good news for the sun-grown farmers in Southern Oregon who deserve a break. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis is facing more criticism about his tactics in fighting against the adult use ballot initiative. This week, he called on 3 sheriffs to join his No on 3 initiative with various sound bites about driving while impaired and one against domestic violence. That sheriff is quoted saying, "When we investigate domestic assault, it usually involves marijuana. Yet, there have been many research studies that says the opposite occurs." With the latest polls on the Yes on 3 initiative in Florida, here's our Florida resident and correspondent, Jeff Aker.
Hi, I'm Jeff Aker, Master Gardener from Florida with your Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As for what's been going on here in Florida is a lot of recovery due to Hurricane Milton. But we're getting back on our feet. One of the most interesting things is I'm seeing a lot of tankers, like big gas tankers pumping water out of one area and taking it to another. It's very interesting to see, but recovery efforts are going good. As for the vote, by the time you see this, depending if I make the A block, the B block, or the C block of Cannabis News Coast to Coast, it'll only be 6, 7, 8 more days till we know we vote. I voted Tuesday. I voted yes. Notables, I read an article that Jimmy sent me about the idea of the medical industry here in Florida hurting because of recreational. If DeSantis signs it, it could, because it costs like $175 to get the license, it's $75 to get a doctor, end up having about $250 in it. It's all going to boil down to cost in Florida, I believe. If recreational gets passed here in Florida, which I hope it does, if it costs a tremendous amount of money versus medical, there's going to be people who go medical. If it's a tremendous amount of money different than black market, I fear it's not going to help our black market. So it's a lot of different factors floating around in Florida right now, so stay tuned. Subscribe, come back. I'll have the latest and greatest right as we vote. I voted already, and guess what I did? I'm Jeff Aker for Cannabis News Coast to Coast.
In the Garden State of New Jersey this week, a new bill was introduced that would allow citizens who have a substance abuse disorder related to cannabis to ban themselves voluntarily from all dispensaries. The bill was loosely based on a similar bill for gamblers to keep those afflicted with that addiction from entering casinos. Since that bill was introduced, the list has grown from over 1,000 participants to over 23,000. Arkansas continues to struggle with their ballot question about cannabis reform, and now the state Supreme Court has ruled that the current ballot question is too vague and no votes will be counted, even though the question is already on the printed ballot. What a mess. Here's Kevin Shakir, the Shake Man, with more.
Kevin Shakir, aka the Shake Man, for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and this is the Arkansas Cannabis Report. Can you say it's a magic trick? Somehow the vote has disappeared. The Arkansas State Supreme Court has ruled that they will not count the vote for the ballot initiative that's on there for the amendment of marijuana for adult use and patient grow. So, hey, it is what it is. On a 43 vote, they decided that there was technical aspects to the amendment that they did not find favorable for the patients, so they pulled the whole thing. Again, when we talked to Arkansans for patient access, basically they were disappointed, but not disheartened as far as moving forward. They will be moving forward with new things to come and new ways to battle. I also want to let everyone know that I am going to be expanding onto a new platform called Fanbase. We can actually have a lot of cannabis type reviews, articles, and all of that stuff. So again, the Shake Man 420, you look for that handle. I'll be on, again, Fanbase. So join me there until then. And also make sure that you keep it right here on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We will be combining both of them. Some of the news reports that are too long over here, I will move them over to Fanbase. Again, Kevin Shakir, aka the Shake Man. Now back to more cannabis news with Alaina Pinto.
And finally tonight, the power of the female when it comes to cannabis is non-negotiable since the male plant is useless. All of the flowering plants of cannabis sativa are females. And now there's some research on what impact that might have on sales. The National Institute for Drug Abuse reports that for the first time, women ages 19 to 30 are spending more on cannabis than men. The NIDA director, Nora Volkow, thinks that trend might have been caused by the amount of anxiety and stress that cannabis relieves. There's also more evidence from Jointly, a discovery data app that says that women now account for 55% of all users of the plant medicine and will spend on average $91 per purchase, and men spend $89. Well, now you might see a shift by manufacturers in how they market their beverages, edibles, and tinctures. Products like that, many women prefer. Okay, what do you think? Leave it in the comments. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debi Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of the news from the industry. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.